point out this quote because this really resonated with me. It was on page 19, and you said, very few women have the natural attributes, physical or otherwise, to demand constant attention. The ones who fall into the latter class must never let the suitor feel victory. All right, so everyone, welcome Clarence. He is the author of the book Heartbreak. The Heart I Broke Was My Own. And so this is a wonderful, actually, I consider it to be a journey, right? A journey of stories of one particular heartbreak that seems like it includes a lot of different heartbreaks. So I just want to dive into it. So Clarence, tell us, how would you describe your book?
First and foremost, that's very intuitive of you, Dr. PJ. One of the biggest complaints that I've received on this piece is that those who have indulged or read felt like they were somewhat misled by the title. And when I explain it, that it's really a layered title, that it's complex, it's not as simple as it seems. And once I finish the explanation, that it is a series of heartbreaks that led to an ultimate large heartbreak, which then all ties back to me. They go, oh, okay. So very intuitive of you to pick up on that. The way that I generally explain it before getting into that piece is that it began as an extended apology letter to my oldest son for my absenteeism in his life as a father. And what it led to ultimately was an opportunity for me to share the journey of how a parent or a person in relationship can find themselves removed from a critical or needed place in another person's life, so that that person, as well as the one who caused the heartbreak, can find some form of closure to the experience or the journey as you highlighted.
Great, great. And so, and what I really wanted to focus on with this season of my show is people's stories, because I feel like we all have stories. All of our stories are going to be different because we're all unique people. We all experience different people in different ways at different times in our life. But the essence of our story, the foundation of our story, links us to each other. And I sort of feel that when you go through something or a multiple of things, it's not just for your recovery, not just for your development, not just for your healing, but for the people who are assigned to your life, right? And
Yeah.
so by you sharing your stories or people sharing their stories, it helps us connect, because even though the story is different, that same foundation is what the principle is what connects us all. And so what I really found refreshing about your story is that this was a different perspective that a lot of us, I want to say, I hate to say it, but ignore. And that's the man side of things. And so I feel that when people read your story, they will start to look at things from a different perspective or multiple perspectives. But before we get into that, I just wanted to say that we're going to cover a couple different topics as we're going through Clarence's story. And so just to make y'all alarm and get ready, we're going to talk about, I want to say, mate selection. He touches on that and how guys think of women. He also touches on family patterns. And, you know, I'm a legacy person, so that goes into it. And also imagery. And so we see imagery so much in our lives, our professional and our personal lives. And so we're going to look at how all of those three things ties into someone's story, but also how it ties into how we feel that others think about us, how we act when sometimes we are avoiding things, but we are still following some type of pattern that was kind of like we were brewed in it because maybe we were born in it. And so we're going to touch on all of that. And I just want to say, first of all, Clarence, thank you for writing this, because sometimes people don't understand when you are an author, which is still the same as being an artist. Each time you produce something, a project, you are giving away part of yourself. When you are authoring a book or an article, that's a sense of vulnerability, because people not only hear your story, but even if you do fiction, the way that you write it, you are still giving of yourself. And that takes a lot to give of yourself. So first of all, thank you and congratulations on this book. And just thank you for sharing your story to help others. So let's just dive on into it. Okay.
Thank you for acknowledging the journey and the experience and the exposure that I'm currently embracing by having my story live on its own for however someone wants to interpret it or receive it or judge it. It is truly a vulnerable experience, the most vulnerable I've ever been in a public space. So thank you for acknowledging that.
You're welcome. So I want to get into the mate selection, because that's one thing that's always a hot, especially these days. And when I say mate selection, so just folks, so you know, I have read his book cover to cover, and my background is I'm a researcher. So I'm always finding maybe some things that people are like, oh, you thought about that? Oh yeah, I thought about that. Okay, so mate selection. On page 9, you talked about how you looked for flaws in your potential mate at that time. You looked for flaws in your potential mate at that time that would validate yourself. Yes. And you said the lack of self-esteem in approaching women felt out of your league. So explain, when you're talking about mate selection, not just in this book, but in general, how does that come from the man's perspective when you are selecting a mate? Just talk to us about that.
I would love to say that part of myself, at the time I was 21 years old, and that I would love to say that the lack of maturity that I had at that time is the reason I thought the way I did in that moment. But I'm afraid that even a part of that is, there's still a residual of that part of that type of processing that lives in myself and in a large part, a number of other folks who are single and actively dating, even in this current stage of our lives. And what that is that we have an idea or a list or an inventory of attributes that we want our mate to behold. Sometimes we shoot higher than we feel we're worthy of receiving or attracting. Sometimes depends on the type of person you are, and I am one of those type of people. I want the best of what life has to offer, even if I don't feel like I'm currently providing the same level of attractive attributes to garner the attention, desire, affection, if you will, of the type of person that I want. So let's go back to answer your question. As a 21-year-old fella, my shots were shot pretty high. I took low percentage shots. I went for the best of whatever was available in the market. And my way of helping to build my confidence to take those shots is that I would look for anything that was amiss or off or a quote unquote flaw in the person that would normalize them enough for me to feel like, okay, they're not supernatural, right? That they're approachable for at least that reason. Sometimes I didn't find that thing before my mouth would open and things would come out and the conversation would start. And so in that particular relationship I'm speaking about in very early on in the book on page 9, it was I pray that she's still alive, an amazing woman. I mean, on all aspects, obviously physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, her family background, what she had already accomplished in her life at such a young age. And it was all so impressive. And I kept comparing that or weighing that against what I believe I brought to the table at the time. And I go, this does not make sense. This caliber does not choose someone like me. In other words, it was self-defeating and self-deflating. in that regard. And because of that, because I could never grasp, and this relationship went on for a while, why they would choose me and be as consistent as they were in terms of how they showed up in my life and was faithful to me, I couldn't understand it. So I sabotaged the relationship.
And so, and when you make that description and what you just said, I think about like, oh my gosh, that is a lot of people that I know or knew, because we're in
Fortunately.
different stages of our life. Like you said, that was when you were 21. There are some people who may be 45 and still have that 21 mindset because of whatever that's happened, in their life. So how do you feel when you wrote that and you introduced that to the book? Why did you decide to include that? Because you don't have to include everything. So why did you decide to include that?
Yeah, that's a big question as well. Thank you for asking. I believe that all of our lives have a rhythm to it, or a theme, if you will.
Mhm.
My life centered around, I was able to gauge the rhythm of my life and where I was in different aspects or different time periods of my life by two things. The women who were involved in my life, because women have been a central theme of my life, my entire life, whether it's from my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, my mother, my sister, my godmother, my older sister, who's a god sister, but we don't use that title. She is my sister, or women that I were interested in or dated or had some type of involvement. So that was one of the large themes. And the other was music. Um, so as I was developing the storyline, if you will, the two thoughts were, how do I gauge where I'm at in the story for someone else to be able to measure the beat I'm on, if you will. It seemed less polarizing, if you will, or attractive to a reader to just associate every moment with a song or an album or an artist and what they were doing. And so, and to be authentic to myself, I know what role women have played in my development, good and bad. And so I chose to pick a woman for each stage. That particular segment was really to talk about two things. One, how insecure I was about myself in my development at that particular time in my life for a key reason. But let me put a pin in it. When we talk about whether you're 21 or 45 or whatever stage you're in, insecurity doesn't have an age group. That
Or an
unfortunately,
expiration date.
one expiration date. So I've had to learn that it may not be the same thing you're insecure about. For instance, if you've come from a life of challenge, let's put it that way, and now you have means where you no longer have food insecurity or shelter insecurity around your shelter or things of that nature. But there may be another level of insecurity that has developed in your life based off of where you are in the circles you move in. So insecurity is somewhat innate to us as human beings. And that's why that particular aspect seems to never just fade away. But in that particular point, it was not only the insecurity, it was where the insecurity came from. I was transitioning from being the type of person that managed my insecurity by just dating multiple people. It was the way I fed my insecurities at that time was by quote unquote conquering uh, new and better opportunities to date people. So the more insecure I felt, the more I had to date, the more I had to approach different women of different looks or different things that they brought to the table that would make me feel like, okay, I am a man, or as some of us would say back then, I am the man.
Mhm.
When I found her, it was, whoa, there's no better than this. So what am I doing? I need to stop and pause and show appreciation for this relationship. But it only heightened my insecurities and it didn't resolve my insecurities. So that was a big point for me, a thing that I was trying to highlight in that relationship. But more importantly, it was a transition for me. I failed in that relationship because I couldn't manage my insecurity. But the failure prepared me then for who I ultimately ended up marrying, because she was equally as attractive, equally as impressive in terms of the things that she brought to the table and brought to our relationship. And if I had not gone through the previous relationship that I talked about on page 9 and dealt with that failure because of my insecurities, I would not have had enough personal resolve, if you will, or resiliency to keep my insecurities in check when I finally met who I call in the book Candy with a K.
Yes, and you dropped so many gems in just that quick minute. And you talked about the circle, and really it's almost like a circle of life because of those insecurities, because our experiences as we grow and mature through life, we're going to hit pockets of insecurity because we're going to different levels. And
Yeah.
so I'm gonna leave that where that, because we could talk about that all day. I really wanted to point out this quote because this really resonated with me. It was on page 19, and you said, very few women have the natural attributes, physical or otherwise, to demand constant attention. The ones who fall into the latter class must never let the suitor feel victory. I was like, oh my gosh. And I think you
Yeah.
just touched on that when you talked about being like a conqueror. And just really that kind of gives women the mindset of, and when I talk about this, you know what I see? I see a lion like walking through the jungle, like looking, for his prey. Not to say, women are prey or the other way around either, because, depends on
It,
uh,
it could go both ways. Yes.
right, how you like to pursue, because the lioness does the same thing. But
Yeah, she does. I know firsthand.
yes. But I just really wanted to point out that because there's so many, and there's a lot of different quotes in the book. There's just a few sentences that just sum up life and behaviors of people. And I really like too how you even define in that, I want to say on page 35, it talks about the perfect mate. And a lot of times women think that they're the only gender or sex that's saying, oh, I have this perfect mate, I have a list, and that men just are there. But men have a list. It says here, and read it quickly, I wanted a wife with whom I could launch a dynasty, someone who would help me create and leave an undeniably rich legacy for our children and grandchildren. I yearned for a woman who would help me to redeem and reclaim my family's name after a legacy of men who were in most ways absent in the rearing of their children. I wanted more than physical comfort. I needed a wife who eclipsed my story and challenged me to see beyond the limits of my own reality. There is truly something to be said for those encounters that make you want to be a better person. And I wanted to marry someone who would inspire me to greatness. And then it also said, I want a woman that I would marry could stand up to my mother's standards, which were high to the point of almost being unattainable. And I would be proud to bring her to my parents' home. And so that was a strong statement. It really let me know how much, one, you value your mother, and that your mother must have an incredible story to tell as well. And so that kind of leads us on to talking about the family patterns. And what I like to say, the patterns. The
conversation continues with part 2 of this discussion on Dr. PJ's storyline.